What is up, people? Van from the Vanderverse Gaming channel here, bringing you another Should I Buy video on Solasta, Crown of the Magister. This game, similar to Baldur's Gate 3, is based on the 5th edition D&D rules. And since I DM for 5th edition, and I'm a big fan of RPGs and tactical RPGs, I was really excited for this game to see how it felt playing this versus playing the actual tabletop version. And in addition to that, I wanted to compare the experience I had with Solasta versus the experience I had with Baldur's Gate 3. So, if you haven't already watched my Baldur's Gate 3 video review of Early Access, you can click on the eye in the right-hand corner, and that'll get you to that video. And in addition, if you sub by clicking on the icon in the bottom right-hand corner to my channel, I will be making a comparison video between Baldur's Gate 3 and Solasta on which one I feel is the best adaptation of 5th edition tabletop D&D. So stay tuned for that. So let's get into the game. So the first, probably most important detail about Solasta is the game is not using the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition books. It's using the standard rule set. So basically, the SRD is what they call it, is the rule set that governs how you play 5th edition D&D, action, bonus action, base classes, etc. But that doesn't mean that they are allowed to use any of the IP from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So, like Forgotten Realms, all the names of characters, Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide, all of that stuff is not in this version of the game. So what that does is it changes your experience a little bit because they had to come up with some of their own subclasses and their own feats. Because in the SRD, feats are not available. You start getting into feats in the Player's Handbook and Xanathar's Guide. So it's a little bit weird when you're transitioning from the tabletop to this game, because a lot of the stuff is very familiar and plays just like the tabletop, and a lot of the stuff is very foreign. So for me, someone who likes to build a character and plan it out and theory craft, unfortunately, a lot of the classes and subclasses that you may want to play in the tabletop, you won't be able to play in this version of this game. So with that being aside, with all of that aside, they currently have 6 classes in the game. They have the Paladin, the Ranger, the Fighter, the Rogue, the Wizard, and the Cleric. So basically your standard 6 classes. All of them, when you build the character, they all play very similar to building a character in D&D. All the race rule sets are pretty common. They have very limited amount of races. They have 2 different halfling races, which are kind of like the Lightfoot versus the Stout. They have 2 different dwarf races, the Hill versus the whatever the other one, Mountain, I believe. They have, a High Elf and I think it's High Elf and Wood Elf. Then they also have the Half Elf, and then they have the Human. So for the races and sub-races they have, they're very consistent with what you would get from 5th edition D&D tabletop with the pluses and minuses, etc. But a lot of the favorite, races and sub-races are not available, like the Varian Human and some of the other races that are in 5th edition. So with that being said, building your character also feels very much so like 5th edition tabletop, where you can choose to use the point buy, you can choose to use the standard array, or you can keep rolling your dice until you get the set of dice that you want, and then you can drop them into the slots that you want. So obviously, when you have a game where you can infinitely roll your dice until you get a really good set of dice rolls, that's probably going to be the best bet for you in this version of the game. If you want to play it like a standard tabletop, then of course you could do the standard, the standard array or the point buy. Getting into building proficiencies and all that stuff, it all functions just like what you would feel in 5th edition tabletop, with your proficiency bonuses and being able to choose different skills that you can put proficiencies in, etc., etc., etc. Now, once we get past the character creation and we pick out all of our stuff, when it comes to character creation, it is early access, but you are very limited on your character and how they look, skin tone, hair, styles, all that. And even more, you're very limited on your voice choices, which to me, that was kind of an issue for me, because when 3 of my characters have the same voice and it doesn't sound right for the type of race they are, it just was kind of strange. So I hope that once it gets out of early access that they will add more character creation options. But for what you get, it is what it is, right? A lot of games that are especially smaller game studios, they're not going to put as much time and effort into the character creation section of it. They're going to put more of their time and effort into the gameplay, which is definitely apparent in Solasta. Now, once you get through this, you can choose to start a new campaign where you have to pick from 4 characters. I chose to create all 4 of my characters, but if you don't want to do that, there's pre-generated characters for you that you can choose from if you don't want to create your own. So it's kind of nice that if you're fresh and you're new to D&D 5th edition, you don't really quite understand and you don't want to gimp your character by not knowing how to build it, you can just use some of the pre-generated class race combos that they already have available. So once you select either all pre-made or all ones that you made, you can choose 4 of them to then dump into the game. Now, when you get into the cinematics and the voice acting and all that of the game, it's very straightforward. When you build your character, you give your character certain traits based on your background, like if you're a scholar, an artisan, etc. And you can choose to have greed or, to be violent or, all those different types of personality traits. I think you believe you choose 2 for each of your character, and that changes how each of your character responds in conversation. So unlike Baldur's Gate 3, where there's so much background in the conversations and what your characters do and say and how they interact with each other, Solasta is very straightforward. Each character will have one generated response based on their proficiencies and based on the background you choose. And so you have a 1 in 4 choice of which way you want to respond depending on each character. And when it comes to, satisfying a role like persuasion, intimidation, any of those, it will tell you on the character's response on what your % chance is of passing that intimidation, persuasion, whatever check. So much more streamlined, much more, not as much of a story-based where your characters are unique and they all interact with each other. Very straightforward, which is kind of simplified, and I don't mind it at all. You have your simplified answers that you're giving to them, and I think it works. The voice acting in it is pretty spot on. I don't think it's bad. The animations obviously need some work, but again, it's an early access and it's a smaller budget type game. If you're comparing this game to Baldur's Gate 3, you're probably not doing it justice, because obviously they do not have near the budget that Baldur's Gate 3 would have, and they don't have the full rights to all the IP. So from that standpoint, I think Solasta does a good job. When you look at this game compared to other RPGs, this one feels a lot like Pathfinder. So if you ever played Pathfinder Kingmaker, you can check out my Pathfinder Kingmaker videos. This plays very similar to that, where you have your characters, it's a top-down, and you can control them similar to like a Pathfinder or an old Baldur's Gate game. And you can hit spacebar to pause time when you're not in live action combat. When you're just moving around, you can pause time. And even the overland travel plays like Pathfinder. So I really like how they did the overland travel in this game. It allows you to do rest, it allows you to do crafting and all that stuff during the travel, and then you can set the pace. If you set the pace to be fast, you'll get there quicker. If you set the pace to be slow, you'll get there slower and you'll eat more rations, but then you can get surprised when you attack. So it kind of tells you how you want to set your pace and how many long rests you want to take, etc. And based on how you travel, just like in the tabletop, is the likelihood that you're going to get attacked, and whether they have advantage on you or you have advantage on them because of surprise. If you're sneaking and you're going at a slow pace, if you get into combat, you're probably going to have surprise on them. If you're going at a fast pace, they're probably going to surprise you. When you're going at a normal pace, usually it's 50-50. But I like how they do the overland travel and the random attacks. I love random encounters in 5th edition D&D Tabletop, and so the way that they implemented that in the game is really a good idea. And the same with the rations. You know, understanding that you have to plan out rations and make sure you have enough on your character to get to the location and back, I think is really cool as well. Now, when you get to the actual combat, the gameplay, and the UI, I feel like this game is much more tactical than other RPGs that you've ever played. Like Pathfinder, even in turn-based mode, does not feel like a tactical RPG. Baldur's Gate 3 does not feel tactical. This game feels to me like an XCOM where you have the grids. It almost looks like you're playing XCOM, but you're using 5th edition rules. And what I like about it is the UI is extremely simple to understand. And it's broken down in a way that it makes sense to me. And I really like how they laid it out. It's clean and it's very easy to use. The one thing that is not explained really well in the game is the lighting. So they do incorporate lighting like you would in 5th edition. So if you see that when you're attacking, that you're at advantage and you get to take the higher of the two rolls, then that's a good thing. But if you notice that you don't seem like you should be at a disadvantage and you make an attack and it shows that you have disadvantage on the attack, which means you roll 2 dice and take the lower, it's most likely because of the lighting. So you may want to make sure you have a character that casts, the light spell or, has a torch in one hand, a way to light the area, and you'll probably notice that when you roll an attack again, you'll go down to just 1 dice. So if you only roll one die, then you don't have advantage or disadvantage. It's just a normal roll. So keep it in mind because there were many a times that I missed out on sneak attack with my rogue because I was constantly at a disadvantage because of the lighting. So that's one thing they don't explain real well, but you can definitely fix that with the whole how the lighting works. You can kind of see it up on the top in like the character screen. If you look up, there's like a little icon on the top left of the character. And I believe that kind of signifies how hidden you are and all of that. So you may want to look into that. But overall, the way the combat works, from how you do your movements, the dash, the disengage, the attacks, the reactions. So if you're getting attacked and you have the shield spell, it actually prompts you to use your reaction to shield yourself to raise your AC so you don't take damage. Just all in all, it really was a great experience. So if you put aside the character creation is not robust by any means, but the actual designing your character feels just like designing your character sheet in Tabletop, and the graphics and the cutscenes and all that are not this crazy graphically, appealing, amazing design. If you just base this game on the actual gameplay, combat, and UI and how it fits against the Tabletop, I feel this game does a fantastic job of taking D&D 5th edition and bringing it to a digital platform. I think it does a better job than a lot of the other games, including Pathfinder Kingmaker, which the tactical version of that was an afterthought. It was more supposed to be a real-time pause, where this game was designed to be a, tactical-based combat. So just to keep that in mind. Now, I will tell you that I've got into many of a conversation in this game, and I feel like the percentages to pass some of these checks are extremely low. Like, I don't think I had an intimidation or a persuasion chance more than 50%. So almost everyone I tried to talk to, I ended up failing and had to fight them. And so on the screen right now, you'll see this is combat with probably one of the higher level combats that you face in the early access. And, everything has 100 plus hit points. It was quite strong. But again, we were, I think, level 4 or 5 at this point, so it felt right. Like the monsters you were fighting felt just right on how strong they were versus you, and made it felt very challenging. I will mention that some of the rules are different, like in D&D with the Rogue 5th edition rules. I'm pretty sure they have a rapier classified as a light weapon. I've noticed that both in Baldur's Gate 3 and in Solasta, the rapier is not classified as a light weapon, so you can't dual wield with it. So right now, currently, you can only dual wield if you're using a short sword and a short sword, or a short sword dagger, etc., etc. So just, there's some things about it that are a little bit different, and that also gets me into subclasses, feats, etc. So the subclasses in this game, almost every class has one subclass that is identical to the SRD. Like the rogue has the thief subclass, the paladin has the I think it's oath of devotion, or one of them that's very similar. The cleric has like the life domain. So most of them have a domain or a subclass that is pretty identical to the tabletop rules. However, there's a lot of subclasses that are not. They're similar, but they're not. Like they have a Shadowcaster class for the rogue, which is different than the arcane trickster, but kind of. The paladin has different oaths that aren't even in the game, the normal 5th edition. So the wizard has different subclasses that aren't in the normal. And so there's definitely some homebrew type classes and subclasses in the game that you would have to look in to see if you like or dislike them, because they didn't have the full IP to use the player's handbook and Xanathars and all that. In addition, feats, in this game, pretty much when you hit 4th level and you get to choose between attribute points and feats, I feel like the feats that are available, at least in early access, they don't have any of the cool feats that made them fantastic. You know, in the tabletop version, having like crossbow expert or great weapon master or polearm master or sharpshooter and, you know, all of those really cool feats, sentinel, those are all really good feats that make you want to get a feat in the game. Looking at the list of feats they have available, I'm pretty sure in the SRD, there are like no feats listed in the SRD. They're only in the player's handbook. So almost every feat that you can choose in Solasta, if not all of them, are all homebrew type feats that they basically made up. So none of them fit into the tabletop 5th edition D&D world, unfortunately. So that is definitely a little bit different. But at the same time, it adds variety that you wouldn't get in if you wanted to play the 5th edition rules. So you might actually like the difference. Now, when you get into how they handle resting, short rest, long rest, I think they do a brilliant job. You can short rest pretty much anywhere in the game and use your hit dice to heal up, but they only allow you to take a long rest in very specific locations where there's a campfire or there's a bed or something of the sort. So you actually have to be a little bit more cognizant of what you're using, because you don't know when your next long rest is going to be. And so I really like that. That was one of the things that I think was bad about Baldur's Gate 3, which we'll get into in another video. But you could literally port from anywhere on the map, and then all of a sudden you're at your camp to do a long rest. I just didn't like that. It just felt like it was breaking the immersion for me, where I feel like this game makes a little bit more sense in the immersion, where you're not just going to like take a long rest anywhere in a dungeon. You have to find a location that they're specifying is a rest spot and take a rest there. So I do like how they do the long rest, short rest, and it just feels good. Like, the one thing about Solasta, and I'll summarize by saying this, is that the combat, the UI, and the rule set on how it applies to this game feels spot on. Like, I literally feel like it's playing the tabletop on a computer. The parts where it falls through for me is not having access to all of the different books that they can unlock specific classes and subclasses, which I think is the downside to Solasta compared to like a Baldur's Gate 3, which has so many options to open it up to every class, subclass combination in the game, because they have the rights to all of it. That is why I think Baldur's Gate 3 is more promising. But my hope is that Solasta is a hit, and that people buy it and they get enough money to make another version, and hopefully with the fanfare and all the support, they will actually be able to afford the license to get the full IP for Dungeons and Dragons, so that they can actually make a Solasta 2, which allows you to have all that stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give it a like and leave any comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think if you've played the game. I will say I feel like the EA price is a little expensive at the $34.99 mark for what you get, because the gameplay was only about 10 hours of gameplay before you beat it. Obviously, there's a lot of replayability with different classes and all that, but currently the EA price is very expensive. However, I feel like it's worth paying because these guys did a very good job on this game, and I hope they get as much money as they can to improve this game with DLCs and more classes, and in addition to start funding them for a new game where they can afford to buy the full IP from D&D, and we can get a more robust D&D game in a fantastic UI and gameplay. This is Van from the Vaniverse Gaming Channel. I appreciate you guys watching. Cheers and peace out.